Riots. What do you mean riots? Where? DC. Never that, man. Ain't no riots going on. Well, I mean, is it a march? It's not. They in the Capitol building. They done busted out the windows. They in the spot. Is these some white folks? Well, see, I don't know. I don't know what's. Let me see the news. I ain't even check it yet. Let me see what's going on. All right. So listen, here's the deal, people. On January 6th, we saw a mob of white Trump supporters, Confederate devotees, and white supremacists storm the nation's Capitol building. The nation and the world witnessed this insurrection in real time across social media and live news. The crowd broke through police barricades and clashed with law enforcement officers. They climbed walls, broke through windows, and made their way into the Capitol building. Inside, they began roaming the halls of Congress, moving deeper into more secure spaces all the way to the Senate floor. They would remain in that building for well over an hour, facing surprisingly mostly non-lethal force to remove them. Now, although this act is unprecedented in recent history, and yeah, it is a big deal in and of itself, still, this is really yet another opportunity for a real discussion that not many want to have. Instead, everyone is up in arms, just in disbelief. They can never imagine that people would do such a terrible, heinous, undemocratic thing, such a sad, despicable, embarrassing act, attacking our democracy. And yeah, I agree, it was not a good look. But people also have been quick and verbose, rightly so, to point out the hypocrisy of the lack of lethal or even aggressive force being used against these white insurgents compared to if they had been black. Honestly, though, pointing that out is kind of basic and old news now. It's old news. This is America. It's a good example of the double racial standard, but we know this already. The real story here is understanding that these people truly do represent America unchained. They're not new news, and holding America accountable to own this failure is really what needs to happen. That's not the sexy breaking news story that the talking heads want to be the face of. Despite people claiming this isn't us and this isn't representative of America and we have different values than this, no, it is us in that this is America. It's the part of America that society refused to deal with, the government refused to deal with, and especially ever since the Civil War, it's been at the expense of black Americans too. America is this reckless. Don't act like it's not. These are the ideological children of the Confederacy. Trump may have incited this riot, but Trump is also a product of America as well. Trump may be one person, but he was also elected by nearly half of the voting Americans in 2016. And in 2020, he got even more votes and still only lost by 7 million. That's like a 4% gap. These people are still out here and they just sent their boys to the Capitol. And they're probably coming back on Inauguration Day. That's what I heard. That's what I've been seeing on social media. See, the reason that BLM protesters face dramatically greater levels of policing, hostility, and aggression is the same reason these individuals were allowed to roam the halls of the Capitol building for over an hour, taking selfies and leaving with property. It's one and the same. These individuals are treated in a manner that is consistent with how you treat citizens you identify with and sympathize with. They look just like the folks who founded this country. They look just like the ones who currently run this country. And they're probably related to a few of those folks who run it as well, in power and influence in this country. But the key difference is that they're not us. They're not black. That's a key. As long as they're not black or some other unassimilated ethnic minority group, apparently it's all good. So do police need to treat you like trash in order to arrest you? Nah, not necessarily. That's what's been demonstrated every day. So they don't treat these white people like trash even when they break into a federal building. especially when that commander-in-chief over those individuals is one of their own. What do you think was going to happen? This is why this shouldn't be a headline. This is not a surprise. Now, conceptually speaking, when talking about white privilege, which a lot of people are quoting right now, white privilege and black oppression are two sides of the same coin, really. When we see white privilege, we're really reacting to our lack of access to that privilege, which mechanically speaking, that is a denial of access that's really just oppression. When they don't allow us to do what we should be able to do, that's oppression. When we are overly punished for the same crime, that's oppression. Think about it. White people are enjoying a reasonable level of freedom, respect, and treatment. Meanwhile, we can't even go bird watching in a park. They are not getting away with anything we wouldn't demand to get away with too if we were in their same position. Think about it. Now, most black people wouldn't necessarily see us storming the Capitol like they did. But if we did, unless we drew weapons on the officers, we know we wouldn't need to be shot in order to be cleared out of the building. But we know in reality, in today's America, we would have been shot. That's oppression. So let's ask ourselves, when you make up 70% of the national population, white people, is that really a privilege? Is this really much of a privilege for them, or is it a right that half of the remaining 30% are vehemently denied? And what happens when those rights are denied over generations, and generations, specifically human rights? You get an accrued disadvantage, which creates an economic, social, and political handicap so immense you think it's genetic. And that's part of the con. Many black people think our condition is solely based on our own choices. So we spin our tires in self-help and rugged individualism only to get maybe half of what our white counterparts achieve. Half of what we deserve. It's not us, it's society. Now, I'm not saying that we can't say or use the phrase white privilege, but I am saying that it's not as constructive or transformatively oriented for gaining improvement in the material condition of black communities as would be focusing on countering black oppression and using that as ammunition to push for a black agenda and reparations. So listen closely for what I'm about to say. The reality is these white folks are not unilaterally being given any sort of pedestal above how a given law is typically enforced or not. It's that we are unilaterally being beat down with the law, and that law is even broken just in the process of enforcing it, so to speak. That's oppression. And it's that we've been relegated to this abused class of society that we experience it. We're systemically boxed in, pushed down, and cut out. The degree to which a particular law is followed and enforced upon 70% of the population, no matter how the law is actually written on the books, is essentially the prevailing effect of that law. So, relatively speaking, America only cares about laws when it comes to controlling black communities. Whites typically enjoy warnings, minor fines, light jail sentences, and the such. Blacks typically have the book thrown at us so many times that we're ending up buried 6 feet under a stack of books, dying with a criminal record. That's what this is. We've been denied from day one the same rights as those viewed as citizens. We can't run into the Capitol building that we built and cause mayhem, even though we laid the foundation for it and we built it as slaves of this country. And we still haven't received a shred of recompense, compensation, let alone a formal acknowledgement from the executive branch of this nation. The systemic denial of our citizenship has been both explicitly and implicitly enacted, co-signed, or enforced by the U.S. government and exploited by private actors from Joe Schmo to the CEO. Whether we're being over-policed in our own neighborhoods, underpaid at our job, or overtaxed on our homes, it results in stress, loss of hope, and eventually community-wide dysfunction. So forget about pointing out a difference in treatment that's been here since 1619. Again, this is nothing new, and America certainly knows this by now, especially after 2020. How about we use this as an opportunity to call attention to something that we should and can demand? We must demand very specific, root cause oriented, reparative and proactive legislation in exchange for our vote that will transform our community to what it should have always been if it were not for this systemic denial. We need specific policies and protections from this country to begin reparative justice for our Black community. Now, when it comes to racially motivated actions or inactions, specifically, we must enact special legislation which makes it a federal crime with minimum mandatory sentencing to conduct any business or act which disenfranchises or directly harms persons who are Black, either through direct intention, benign neglect, or failure of due diligence in the maintenance of equity and equality when conducting resource distribution. No matter how big or small, it must be a federal crime, and the burden of proof can be exclusively causal, or it can just be a motivating factor, of which should be demonstrable in a number of ways which do not require historical legal precedents to construct the basis of a claim. This is because we need to empower the Black community with a clear path, unencumbered, to legal enforcement of our protections. Clearly, the protections that we have now on the books are not enough to make people think twice, so we must make it painful to oppress Black life. And that's just an example of an idea, but we need to be having those discussions within this context of opportunity rather than just playing and astonished on TV for ratings like a lot of our Black commentators are. And when we have that and other key legislative changes which make up the Black agenda, it's then time to fulfill the inescapable demand for reparations, or the movement for Black life in America will be on an infinite loop that will never end, and it does not have to be that way.